Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Health Made Simple Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bart, and today, again, my favorite veterinarian in the whole world, Dr. Maddie Hanish, is with us today. Dr. Maddie, welcome to another episode of Health Made Simple Show. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. Happy to be here.
So for those of you who have not met Dr. Maddie yet, I'll do a little rewind. We did an episode a couple of weeks ago, which is the reason we're back here today, because we had so many people ask me so many questions, said, here we go again. And I think the same thing's going to happen tonight. Anyways, we'll back up a little bit for our audience, Maddie, that in case people didn't listen to the last episode, let's back up and let's tell them a little bit about you. Why don't you tell them who you are, what you do, and then sneak in there a little bit about the difference or why we kind of consider you a holistic vet versus just a traditional vet. What are the differences? And do you have to give up one to be able to do both?
Lots of good questions there. So I'll start out. I'm Maddie. I went to veterinary school at Ross University in the Caribbean, and then I practiced as a normal GP veterinarian for a few years. During that time, I started dabbling in the more holistic side of things. And my best definition, I guess, of what the difference is between a more holistic approach and the traditional approach is in the way that we treat our patients, the way that we identify issues within the body. So we focus very heavily on root causes, not on symptoms or clinical signs. Our focus is to get to the root of the issue versus basically put a Band-Aid on some of these chronic issues. Now, that role kind of reverses if we're talking about acute issues. And in those instances, so our traumatic cases, our surgical cases, things like that, there's no replacement for our traditional medicine. And so where I kind of fall in the mix is I try to practice a little bit of an integrative approach, taking all the things I know from my schooling and from my traditional years of practice, as well as all of the things I know from my holistic side, and merging them together so that it's not a one size fits all. We can treat things from a multitude of perspectives, and I'm able to put a lot of tools in the toolbox to be able to address these issues.
It's amazing. And it's one of the reasons that Dr. Maddie is my favorite vet in the whole world, is because she has the ability to bring the best of both worlds together. And as a pet owner, that has been something that my wife and I have been seeking out for years. So for many of our listeners, they understand exactly the language you're talking about, because many of our listeners are listening because they often listen to me talk about things like functional medicine. And so for the listeners here tonight, today, whenever you listen to this, are we talking about functional medicine for animals? We really are, which is the nice thing, which means that we're looking for the root causes. And I think that's the fun part of this all. And I think this is why so many people are looking, or have their minds and eyes open to what does it look like if you go to a holistic vet? Quite frankly, Dr. Maddie, I understand it. We've known each other for a while, and I've seeked out other holistic vets before. So I kind of understand what that looks like. Yet for the audience, what would it look like if someone showed up to see you? What does a visit look like?
Yeah. So the first thing of our visit is our questionnaire is going to be quite a bit more in depth than what you've experienced in the past. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper. We're going to get some more information. We may ask some questions that you're like, never even considered that or thought about that. I'll get back to you. And that's great. It's all just the more information we have, the bigger and better story that we can build. So that's kind of our first thing. Deeper dive into the history. My physical exams are a little bit more in depth as well. Sometimes as we get busy in practice, and I'm guilty of it too, our exams start to shorten a little bit because we know what things should feel like. And so we're able to kind of zoom through them a little bit more, but just taking a step back and really taking the time to focus on that patient and to move a little bit slower, to feel a little bit more, again, just to go a little bit more deep in that exam as well. And then we're going to talk a lot about diet, lifestyle, and preventative medicine. So there's a big focus. I don't want to wait for issues to pop up, for disease to pop up. I want to be able to focus on these things ahead of time and be on the forefront of those things. And so it's going to be a lot of conversation about the preventative care labs, things that can give us indications very early on that something isn't quite right. Something's out of balance, and that we need to figure out what's going on to keep your pet as healthy and happy as we can.
One of the things I love about this approach is that one of the trends right now, and it's not a good trend, is that we're seeing more and more sickness and ill animals. On dogs specifically right now, I think the last data I saw, there was over 1 million. I know they're not ACLs, whether they're CCLs. Is that what we call it in the vet world? CCL surgeries, which for us, us humans think of an ACL surgery. It's almost 1 million surgeries. And I don't know if that's a year, but it's a ludicrous amount where dogs should not have issues with their knee joints. We're seeing liver disease through the roof. We're seeing cancers through the roof, tumors through the roof. And there's so many reasons. And I think we're going to have to dive a little bit into probably the root cause, which is going to be often the food that they're eating. But this whole idea, and one of the reasons I'm even here today, and the reason we're having this conversation, is that if we knew the information in advance, where we were looking at markers, quite frankly, if we were looking to say, hey, what's the status of my dog right now? Not just waiting for things to go bad, literally taking a very proactive, preventative position. And I know for a lot of the dog owners out there, we would do anything that we could. And so tonight, as much as anything, I want to really expose that there are things we can do to help our little loved ones move forward and not have to just cross our fingers that we're doing the best job that we can. So in a wellness visit, is it typical? Is it required? Or are there options when it comes to other diagnostic testing? Are there labs that you typically like to run? And what ones would you run?
Yeah. So first, I just want to say nothing is ever required. As the pet parent, you have that choice, you have that autonomy to make those decisions, which can be good and bad. It can go both ways. But nothing is ever required of you. All of this, everything that I want to provide is optional. But it's my recommendation because I truly believe that it's what's best for animals. It's what is going to give us the most information. I hear clients say all the time when their dog comes in with what they would consider sudden illness, or all of a sudden this cancer popped up out of nowhere. Or they'll say things like, my dog has been so healthy up until this point. And the reality is we don't know because we haven't been testing. We don't know if we had done lab work 2 years ahead, if we could have maybe caught it sooner and they wouldn't have came in crisis, if we could have pushed off some of those things. So just a couple tidbits there. But as far as my lab work goes and general panels, I have spent a lot of time researching, diving deep, looking into what is going to get us the most information, while also considering finances, because I do understand that that's part of it as well. And so we have kind of a general wellness panel. That's going to do a lot of the things that you see in the Western side. So a general CBC, which is going to be our red blood cells, our white blood cells, and our platelets. It'll tell us if we're making them right, if they're functioning well, if we have the right amounts, all of those things. The next part of that would be a chemistry panel, which is going to dive into some of our organs, going to look at our kidneys, our liver, some of our digestive enzymes, our proteins, things like that. And in addition to that, we have some new tests that we can run with it as well, something called an SDMA, which is also a kidney value. We touched on that one last time. But that one, I'm going to touch on it again because it's amazing. It's telling us when we have 25% kidney function versus our previous 25% of our kidney function is damaged, when previous tests told us at 75%. So that means we're detecting kidney issues at 75% function left versus 25% function of those kidneys left. That's a big difference. We can do a lot in that amount of time. So that's included, as well as a T4. Our T4 is going to tell us our general thyroid hormone, let us know that it's being produced or it's not being produced. But oftentimes we need to get a little bit deeper of a dive in our thyroid. Our thyroid the plain T4 tends to be just a little bit superficial. So if that one's a little out of balance, we'll need to dive a little bit deeper on that one. And then there's a beautiful new test called a C-reactive protein. And what that test measures is it's an inflammatory marker. And so it's telling us it's not specific, so we don't know where it is, but it's telling us that what our levels of inflammation are throughout the body. So whether that be inflammation of our heart, inflammation of our intestines, like an IBD, IBS type situation, it's going to give us a lot of information on we have inflammation. So we know inflammation isn't great long term in the body. So we can start to measure, okay, we use these supplements and not only show that using them helps, but also to allow the client to have some actual information in front of them. They're not just doing all of this work and going through all of these things for nothing. So it can be beautiful in that way as well. And then our usual SNAP test. So I'm sure you've heard of SNAP tests in the Western world, and that's going to tell us our heartworm status, so whether we're positive or negative, and it's going to give us some insight on a few of our more common tick diseases like Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, Lyme disease. Urinalysis, super important. And if you want to pause me and ask any more questions about these things, you're more than welcome to, Dr. Bart.
Okay, I already wrote down like 50 questions.
Okay, sounds good. Let's go into them.
All right, so I have a bunch. I have a bunch there because I have them for my personal reasons, but I also want our audience to hear some of these. So I want to go back to the kidney one first of all. So I practice functional medicine for humans, and the best thing I can tell people is if we have data, we have an option to potentially see the writing on the wall and maybe a peek at the future. And we've never really had these options with our four-legged furries. And I apologize, I'm not biased to cats, so think of everything we're talking about for cats and for dogs. Yet that particular one hits home for me when you talked about the SDMA. Am I saying that right? SDMA? Yeah. The kidney test. Many of you already know if you've been listening to my podcast. I'm a dog lover. We have 8 dogs. Sometimes we've had 10. And one of my little favorite girls I've ever had, her name was Paris. She passed not too long ago. She was one of those little special ones. When I first noticed that she had outward symptoms, she was only 7 years old. So that's considered very young. Many of us, for many of us, we think of a little French bulldog at 7 years old, pretty young. When I brought her to the doctor, I know some things were off, and she had kidney markers pretty high already. We didn't run an SDMA test. I didn't run that when she was 3 or 4 years old. By the time I saw, there was already kidney damage. We were in like stage 3, stage 4. And even with all the tools I have in my belt, and I promise you I have a lot of tools. My people know that. I was able to extend life a little bit and make quality of life in that extension good, but it was a very, very short window. When I think of the SDMA right now, all my dogs at every age. So I have dogs that are, I got dogs at every age right now, but nonetheless, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old. I test on every one of them because if I knew that prior with the tools that I have holistically, ways to support the kidney, the actual organs themselves, I truly believe in my heart that we could have had a different outcome if I had that data. So for those of you out there, it's these opportunities that we have to test, beautiful. So that was just one of I had to at least make that comment there. So Maddie, last time we got together, you talked about something that I was unaware of about the age of a dog. And I think you said in the first 4 years that they age a little bit faster than we think. We think like dog is 7 years or 9 years. Can you elaborate on that again? Because it brought up a question for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually a fairly recent study. And so it's pretty interesting, but they are finding that dogs and cats actually age very significantly in their first 4 years of life. Mm-hmm. And then that age progression slows down for the rest of their years. And so instead of the traditional model of 1 dog year is 7 human years, it's actually very variable between those years. So our distance from 0 to 1 is actually more like 0 to 20. Mm. And then our distance from 1 to 2, and these aren't exact numbers, I'm not quoting the paper perfectly, and then our 1 to 2 age pushes us all the way up into our 30s. And then our 3 to 4, we're pushing up into our 50s already. So we're hitting what's considered midlife at around 4 years old, 4 to 5. Mm. And so for them, that's dramatic. And a lot of people are saying, my dog's only 4. Why do I need to do lab testing? Why do I need to run this blood work? Because your dog is really 50 already, if we look at it that way. And so we could have already missed things at 4 to 5 years old that we could have caught even sooner. And so really, truly, you can't do enough lab work, and you can't start it soon enough. And even starting it very early on to have those baselines, so we have something to compare it to in the future, is amazing. So you really can't start soon enough.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on that sentiment, especially because that's what I do in my practice. And I think for many, the functional medicine practitioners out there that agree with this, I encourage the sooner we can start collecting data, the better. If I have a guy and I'm checking his PSA in his early 40s, I know exactly what he's doing year to year to year. We can catch things really quick in terms of like prostate cancer. Frankly, when that same gentleman comes in, he's 80 years old and I haven't seen him yet, I tend to lean away from labs. I know that sounds crazy. And here's why. At 80, for a male in our country, I know at this point, we're really talking about palliative care. We're beyond a lot of the things that we can be super corrective with. And I'm never giving up hope, but a lot of it is palliative where we're just trying to help. I can't emphasize enough because what I'm hearing from you is if we have the labs early, we can actually do a lot. Now, granted, I brought my 11-year-old bulldog to you on Saturday and we had like rock star status, which was beautiful. It was nice confirmation for practicing the type of health that we do. For those of you are familiar with our dogs, this Dr. Bob came in and he got a clean bill of health. It was really nice. I know we got some dental things to do, but nonetheless, his labs look fantastic for an 11-year-old bulldog. Maybe one of the best labs I've seen. I want to go back for a quick second here. So you mentioned T4. Do you see a lot of dogs with thyroid conditions?
Oh my gosh, so many dogs with thyroid conditions. Hypothyroid is definitely the more common. Hyperthyroid doesn't really happen in dogs. It does in our cats, though. So our cats are hyperthyroid and our dogs are hypothyroid. And so we see all kinds of endocrine diseases in general, but lots and lots of hypothyroidism.
And I know, so when I see hypothyroid cases, more often than not, first thing I have to do, well, there's more than one thing, but I have to look at diet right away. And I have to look at levels of toxicities and see what's taking place in the liver. Are there some similarities in the dog world?
Yep, absolutely. Diet is a huge component of all endocrine diseases. Definitely.
All right. So I'm going to go back to the labs for a moment. So I know in the last time we talked, you also talked about there being kind of a comprehensive, maybe another level of labs that you might do. So I think from what you said is most of the labs that you just mentioned could be run in-house at the dog cooler where you practice. And then there's some other more, we'll call them functional lab testing. Could you elaborate on some of those? What other tests, if you're out there, you're a mom or dad, you're like me, quite frankly, and you're saying, what else could I learn to enhance my dog's status on this earth? How long the quality and longevity? What could I do?
Yeah. So let me pop back to kind of the general because I didn't quite finish up. There were a couple more, but every single one of these can be a topic on its own, and it will be eventually. So I'm just going to briefly go over the last couple. That would be our urinalysis and sediment. So looking at our urine, looking for crystals, things like that, to try to catch urinary crystals before they become stones so that we aren't having to have a surgical procedure in the future. That's huge. And then our omega-3 levels, and that one will be a whole podcast on its own. So I'm not even going to jump into that, but we can test that in-house as well. And then we dive into some of our more comprehensive things. So there's this really cool test called the Nu-Q screen. And what the Nu-Q screen is it's a cancer screen, and it detects little pieces of cancer DNA in the blood to tell you if there's levels that are high enough to where we start to be concerned about tumor formation, that this is truly developed from, let me backtrack. So for those of you who don't know and aren't aware, we produce cancer cells every single day. Human body, animal body, doesn't matter. The strength of our immune system, along with lots of other factors, determines whether or not we develop cancer. And so what this test is doing is it's detecting the level of those cancer cells in the blood, so that we can be proactive about bringing those levels back down, scanning to make sure that we're catching, if there is cancer, we're catching it as soon as we possibly can, and then starting to support the body so that that body can help to do what it needs to do and get rid of those unnatural cells in the body. So that's a pretty cool test that we didn't have available even last year. So I'm pretty excited about that one. And then, like we said, the comprehensive thyroid panel. So that's going to dive a little bit deeper. It's not just going to give us what is our thyroid level at this moment, but it's also going to tell us, is our brain telling our thyroid to even produce the hormones? Are we low because of a thyroid issue? Or are we low because of a brain stimulation issue? And so that one is really important as well. And then we can do microbiome testing as well. I know microbiome is kind of a buzzword right now, but it is so crucial and so important. And the reality is there is so much still to learn, but we also know so much. And so it's really important that any patient that's ever been on antibiotics, ever been fed a highly processed diet, that they go ahead and get some microbiome testing, and we get that balanced out. That's usually going to be one of the first things that we're going to discuss and talk about. Along with kind of GI disease, we can run some GI panels, which are going to tell us our folate, our B12, our TLI. Those are all just different markers within the body that can lead us in different directions as far as where our GI disease can be coming from. So is it small intestine? Is it large intestine? Is it lack of pancreatic enzymes? It'll help us to know exactly where in that intestinal tract we're having issues. So that one can be really, really important. Vitamin D. So we can test for vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is not something that is produced by the bodies of dogs and cats. And they can also not absorb it from the sun. And so what they can absorb is extremely minimal, and really doesn't affect anything. And so really diet is the only way that we're getting vitamin D. And for lack of getting in trouble talking about this, any kibble food, except for a very, very, very small few, are going to have synthetic vitamin D. And synthetic vitamin D is not completely bioavailable to our patients. And our food standards make food manufacturers meet minimum levels for survival, not levels for thriving, which there's a big difference between surviving and thriving. Those are not the same things. And so our food meets these minimum levels, and then most of that isn't even bioavailable to the patient, meaning they can't absorb it. So it goes in the mouth and out the other end without ever getting to enhance the body, getting to do what it needs to do along the way. And so I firmly believe that a vast majority of our pets within the United States, at least, are probably vitamin D deficient. And that can manifest as all kinds of things. It can be lethargy. So they're just not having enough energy. It can be neurologic conditions. It can be gastrointestinal issues. I mean, our vitamin D plays a critical role in pretty much every function in the body, heart disease as well. And so that's a pretty big one that a lot of people don't even know that we can test for.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm going to back you up again. I got a lot of questions. All right. So I'm not letting you off the hook on the omega-3, because I know in my practice, I do everything I can to tell people, let's just test it. And I'll explain. So omega-3s, people, these are what the body uses to, they're called resolvents. I don't know if you knew that, but they're called resolvents. So, and that means they help resolve inflammation in the body, which is pretty cool. But we need these omega-3s. And my number one reason I want people to do it, of course, it's good for our joints and our arthritis and all that. And that is probably the primary reason people take it. But most importantly, it'll be indicative of future brain health. And so it's a very, very simple test in my office. I don't know how you do it. So my office, I literally can just have people prick their finger, send it in, and then we'll get results in like 10 days, and it lets us know our status. Is it similar for a dog?
Yeah, it's super easy. Just a little pinprick as well, either on the paw pad or on the inside of the ear, similar to how we would do just like a quick blood glucose test. Super simple.
Beautiful, because that's going to then lead into, I do have some questions, if we can get there today, about some signs and symptoms of the aging pet. We'll go there in just a moment. My next question was, or at least I want to just a little bit more, maybe conversation about microbiome. I know that, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because in functional medicine is kind of my niche. I go around the country talking about the microbiome and how important it is. You mentioned something there that was very important. I think we breezed right by it, that I don't know a lot of people really understand the brevity of just one round of antibiotics. I'm going to use Dr. Bob as a story again here. So the entire time we had Dr. Bob, we've been on our health journey with our dogs. You know, if you asked me about my dogs 20 years ago, I was still feeding them kibble. You know, and you transition, you learn little bit by little bit. And a lot of times it's stair stepping. You get a little bit better here and a little bit better here. So for those of you listening today, if this is way over your head, it's okay. Just starting to gain some information. Perfect. You just have a starting point. So with Dr. Bob, though, we have a lot of and still have a lot of good health habits. Unfortunately, Dr. Bob was given very similar to many of the puppies. He was given an antibiotic in the first 8 weeks of his life. And that forever to this day inhibited some of his microbiome. And this is something that's really has taken me a real long time, even for humans, to help people kind of grasp this conversation. You can take a round of antibiotic that kills off microbiome permanently. And that's problematic. So what did that mean for us? It means that for us with Dr. Bob, he doesn't eat like the other 7 bulldogs do. So he has to have a lightly cooked instead of a full raw diet. And because his digestive system was compromised. So when it goes back to the microbiome, those are the kind of things that help you guide your patients to what foods might work and might not work good for them. Because the truth is, the same diet, just like for animals, and humans, not one fits all, correct?
Correct. Yes. So there's lots of different options, and different patients are going to require different types of food, and they may require different types of food at different stages of life as well. Just because they did really well on a raw diet when they were younger doesn't mean that they necessarily will as they get older. And our protein requirements change as we get older too. So there are a lot of things that food can affect and change. So very much so the same as humans.
Do the protein requirements for an aging dog go up or down?
Up.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which I shouldn't say interesting because I know that for humans, but the perception for most is it goes the opposite direction. You think there's less need for muscle and whatnot. I always tell people the proteins are the amino acids, and those are the building blocks for the new cells, the new bone, the new tissue. So that's fascinating, where I think generally people would think they don't need as much protein. So I want to back up again just a little bit. We talked about some labs and so many different things that could be causing, whether it be liver issues or you see crystals in the urine. Would it be correct for me to say more often than not, it all leads back to diet?
You cut out for a second. It all leads back to
diet. Is that a safe statement to say that all of these things that we're looking at, and maybe not every single one of them, but don't most of them, isn't the starting point or is the foundation that we have to look at what's going in this dog's body?
Yes. When we're talking about chronic diseases, chronic being typically lifelong and typically progressive, always, you can go back to diet and find a cause there.
So not to interrupt you there, Hunt, so more often than not, you go to a vet's office. I'm going to be real specific about this. You go to a vet's office, they have some gut issues and whatnot. And there's a classic line of food that's in most vet offices. Most of you probably familiar with, and it's science diet, correct?
Yep.
All right. So you think your vet's giving you this thing called science diet. You take it, you go home. It's limited ingredients. That's what it's kind of sold as. Limited ingredients, good for the gut, until you actually take a moment to look at the ingredients. Would you, from your perspective, tell me a little bit about what you think about science diet? And listen, I'm not bashing science diet as a company, but as a product for our animals to consume. I don't know this is the healthiest thing in the world. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. And again, whole podcast on its own. Yeah. But yes, absolutely. So you look at those ingredients on the back of the bag and it's all food that we know that we shouldn't even be eating anymore. Our high fructose corn syrups. Well, that has no place in our pet food. It's very high carb, low protein, which is the exact opposite of what we want and what they thrive on. That high carb converts to sugar and just affects everything that as it trickles downstream. A really cool recent paper that came out decided or told us that there's 70 to 80% of our dog's immune system comes from the gut. And so when we're putting these foods that we really wouldn't even eat into into their bodies, then we're affecting their immune system so significantly. It's no wonder that they can't fight off these diseases. It's no wonder they can't bring themselves back to homeostasis. Um, and on top of that as well, just the, not to mention the nutrients in it, but the level of processing of it, the way that it's heat processed, it kills off all of those natural vitamins, natural minerals. So then they still need those to meet AFCO requirements. And so it becomes a synthetic version, like we talked about with the vitamin D earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're spraying that dried crisp with all of these synthetic chemicals, essentially, to balance that out. And so from every aspect that you look at it, it just doesn't really make sense as a true food. But yes, like you said, as far as the company goes, it's a business. They're in the business of making money. They're not in the business of keeping pets healthy. That's just the reality of it. And they're doing a really good job. It's a multi-billion-dollar company that can afford to spend nearly $1 billion a year on marketing alone. And so they're killing it. They're doing a great job as a business. But as far as from a health standpoint, we know that that's probably not the best option.
Yeah, two different things to talk about. One of my best friends, he's no longer with us, was my vet, and his name was Dr. Bart. And he didn't have any training in nutrition other than what they showed up and they told him. That wasn't his expertise. He was a brilliant physician, quite frankly, surgeon, etc. When it came to nutrition, he'd say, no, he'd literally say, Bart, you know more about that than I do. He's like, I don't know. I just give him science. Science would tell me what to give. And we'd kind of chuckle a little bit about it. And I remember looking at it in the back office with him one day. And I think one of the two top like ingredients were cornmeal and soy meal, which are fillers, which I promise you folks, they don't belong in our animals, not anywhere near our animals. Our dogs don't naturally eat corn or soy. They create so much inflammation, all this other stuff. All right. So the labs, it sounds like, and I think from listening to what you're saying, if maybe the dogs and the cats that have been on kibble diet might actually be some of the most important animals to get these labs done with.
Absolutely, they are the most important to be getting these labs on, because we know that our more holistically fed patients, as yours have, they all come back very normal on their labs. We don't see a lot of issues coming up on their labs, not nearly as many, and not as early on as what it seems to be. But our kibble fed animals are definitely the ones that are more at risk for that C-reactive protein that I was talking about with inflammation. That one's going to be through the roof. Our omega-3s are going to be really low. Our vitamin D is going to be low. And so they are absolutely the ones that we need to be doing these lab works on. Everyone, but they're most important.
Here's kind of a fun little story that happened today. So my wife and I were over at our cafe today, Prima Organic Cafe, and gentleman inside, I have one of my dogs with me, Toby. We're talking to a couple of locals, and the gentleman turns around. He sees my shirt on that I'm wearing today. He says, the dog cool on. He goes, oh, do you go to that place? And I said, yeah, I go to there. And he goes, then I said, do you own that place? I said, yeah, my wife and I, it's our place. And he says, oh, thank you so much. I love going there. And he said, we have 3 golden retrievers, and one of them is a rescue. They're all about the same age, yet the 2 of them have always had more energy, more vitality, all the above. Now, they all eat the same food. Then they switched all of their food. They upgraded all their foods into, I believe he was doing lightly cooked. And then there's another brand out there that I think is kind of a stepping stone. It's called Carnivore and Carnivore. And that is kind of a dried whole food product as well. And this is what was fascinating. He said the one dog, and I think he said all golden, they were all about 7 years old, which I think is probably pretty up there for a big dog like that. And he said the one dog, he said, has more energy now than he's ever had in his life. And now he can keep up with his other 2 dogs now that he's eating a different diet, which is fascinating. And that was the adopted dog, and they didn't know any of the background. So it's fascinating how quickly even a dog a little bit later that in the game you can change some of their physiology when you start to give them what they were designed to eat.
That's so beautiful. A really cool part about that is as well, for people listening who are like, I could never home cook food, I could never do the raw food. This man didn't even. He went to the carnivore, which is just a baked, very lightly baked. I think it's like 4 minutes that they bake the food, and then it's air dried. So it's so minimally processed, and there's no heat involved, that it retains all of its natural vitamins and minerals. They don't have to add in any synthetics, but it scoops like a kibble. It looks like a kibble. All of those things. So it's very convenient as well. And so it's pretty beautiful to hear that he had those changes on just that diet change alone.
Yeah, I love hearing those stories, and I get to see him and kind of listen to him on a regular basis, as I know you do as well. All right, so to wrap this up, let's because we can keep talking all day long, and we will. We're going to keep coming back. We're going to keep filling up. And for everyone listening here, if you do have questions, you want us to answer very specific questions, send them. Send the questions on over, and then keep doing your thing. Keep sharing this out. Keep spreading the love to other people that you know. You're going to see more and more. I know this is the Health Made Simple show. You're going to continue to get my functional medicine type podcasts. These are going to be in addition. You might see them as frequently as once a week if Dr. Maddie will do them with me. So we'll probably be doubling down here in the Health Made Simple show platform, and we're going to be doing our human ones, but also our dog ones. So keep doing your thing. Keep sharing it out. Dr. Maddie, let's give the audience an opportunity to, if they want to find you, if they want to reach out, how could they schedule an appointment with you? Where do they go from here?
Yeah. So you can either call the dog Kula. Now I should have the number memorized, but I don't yet. So I can look it up quick.
We'll make sure it's in the show notes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. You can email hello@thedogkula.com, and you can check us out on Instagram @thedogkula. All places that you can connect with us and see what we're up to, and go ahead and schedule an appointment as well.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, thank you once again for joining me here. I'm looking forward to making this a regular, and we will continue to dive deeper and deeper. And again, folks, if you have any questions, please send them in. We'll get them answered, even if they get us in a little bit of trouble here. So again, keep doing your thing, keep sharing it out, keep spreading the love. Dr. Maddie, appreciate you. And I look forward to doing this in a very short period of time again.
Yes. Thank you so much. Looking forward to all of your questions. Can't wait to answer them for you.
All right. Everyone be great. Peace out.